now heard from those who wish to comment on items number 5 and number 6, number 6 being the alternative analysis on San Jose to Merced section. We'll move to the staff presentation on item number 5.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lundberg and board members. I'm Jeff Abercrombie, Central Valley Area Program Manager. And this presentation will provide the board with an update to the Merced to Fresno, Fresno to Bakersfield draft environmental impact report and environmental impact statement, hereto referred to as EIR-EIS, since being in front of the board in May 2011. I'll begin with just a brief overview, and then I'll just discuss the schedule for these two sections and the release of that draft in the next few weeks. Then I'll have Regional Director Dan Levitt, who will finish with the details about the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers milestones that have been achieved since we last were here. As a brief history, in cooperation with FRA and the U.S. EPA and the Army Corps, the environmental process was split into a tiered process, one with the program level review on a statewide basis and separate project level reviews for 9 specific sections. 2 program level EIR-EISs have been done. The statewide system was completed in 2005. And the Bay Area to the Valley was completed in 2008 and recertified in 2010. In 2009, we began the project level EIR and EIS process, which was used to determine specific track alignments and locations of stations to be studied. This process at the project level includes the alternative analysis and the supplemental analysis reports. Briefly, the first of the 2 sections, as I mentioned, is the Fresno to Merced section, which is comprised of 65 miles and is part of the first phase of construction. There is 1 station in this section serving as the phase 1 north end, serving the north region located in Merced. The second section, the Fresno to Bakersfield, is 113 miles long and is also part of the initial construction section. Together, this approximately 180 miles will become the backbone of the statewide 800-mile system. Stations in the Fresno to Bakersfield section include Fresno, Bakersfield, and the proposed Kings-Tulare Regional Station just east of Hanford. These 2 sections have been through a very rigorous process of scoping and alternative analysis. And there have been over 700 meetings for these 2 sections combined since 2007. The preliminary engineering drawings representing a 15% design has been developed to support the EIR process. And so that takes us to where we are presently in the third quarter of 2011. And in talking about the EIR-EIS schedule, the detailed timeline that I would like to cover basically covers the release at the end of this month and its subsequent the subsequent process forward to the final EIR-EIS. Again, please. There we go. Where we are at the for the end of the month, we will begin the printing of the document, so that it will be available, and we'll begin shipping them out. The public notice of availability in the Federal Register for the EIR-EIS will be issued no later than August 12th, and that will begin the public comment period beginning the following Monday, August 15th to September 28th. Comments can be submitted by letter, email, and at public hearings and meetings, or via the authority's website. Where will it be available? It will be posted on the authorities and the Federal Rail Administration's websites. It will be available for review at the authority office in hard copy or on compact disc, and available to the public to request a copy in CD format. It will also be made available in hard copy at public libraries and community centers and other high traffic public areas in the Merced to Fresno and Fresno to Bakersfield sections. Copies will be mailed in CD format to elected officials and various public agencies as well. It is important to note that in the release of this EIR-EIS draft, there is no preferred alternative. And I'll just repeat that for clarification. The document does not present a preferred alternative. In receiving public comments during the comment period, those will be evaluated and be used in the process of selecting that preferred alternative. The preferred alternative will be selected post the comment period, utilizing the comments that were received. The preferred alternative must be selected in cooperation with the U.S. Army Corps and the U.S. EPA. After the close of the comment period, you probably need to go back about 3 slides. Keep going. I'll tell right go forward. Right there. Just hold there for a minute. After the close of the comment period, we'll begin to put together the preferred alternative, which will be announced in November of 2011, and a recommendation will be made to the board of the preferred alternative for action proposed at the December 1st board meeting. Upon approval of the preferred alignment, the final EIR and EIS will be compiled. The final EIR and EIS will be available in January 2012 and posted for 30 days before the board would consider action. The authority board will consider that action for Merced to Fresno and Fresno to Bakersfield for compliance with the CEQA at what is proposed as a special meeting on February 29th and August 1st, 2012. Once the board certifies the final EIR and EISs for these 2 sections, it can then consider approval of the high-speed train project and adopt the related CEQA requirements of findings, mitigation plans, statement of overriding considerations, and so on. At the conclusion of this process, the authority would then file notice of determination with the state clearinghouse and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. FRA is the lead agency responsible for authorizing the federal involvement for the project and is the NEPA lead agency for the Merced to Fresno and Fresno to Bakersfield EIS documents. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is a federal cooperating agent under NEPA. In conjunction, the FRA is responsible then for issuing the NEPA record of decision. The target for the federal action for the record of decision is early spring 2012. Let me take a minute now and talk about the public meetings. The public comment period we will hold additional public meetings. These here will focus in La Grande, Fairmead, Chowchilla, Shafter, and Wasco between the dates of August 14th and 21st. Next slide. These public meetings will use an open house format with display boards and staff to answer questions. It will also be focused in terms of a workshop, but it will provide the opportunity to help people find information in the draft EIR EIS, and will provide ways also for people to comment on the EIR EIS. There will be an area where attendees can complete written comment forms, make verbal comments to a court reporter, and or input comments directly into the authority's website. Next slide. The public hearings will be focused on receiving public forum type oral comments. These begin 30 days after the start of the public comment period. Public hearings will be held in Merced, Madera, Fresno, Hanford, and Bakersfield. Public hearings will be scheduled between the dates of September 14th and 28th and will be held between 3 and 8 p.m. The public hearing format will include open house with the display boards so that questions can be answered, but includes and will be the significant component of this will be the public forum comments being recorded by a court reporter. There will also be the similar means to provide written comments or comments directly into the authority website. And this time I'd like to ask Dan Levitt to continue with the presentation. Next slide.
Thanks, Jeff. Could you go one more slide? In November of 2010, the authority, the Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA, U.S. EPA, and the Army Corps entered into a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, on integrating the high-speed train project's compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, the Clean Water Act, Section 404, and the Rivers and Harbors Act, Section 14. This MOU continues and expands on the authorities and the FRA's prior cooperative relationship with the EPA and Army Corps for implementing the high-speed train project. Through the MOU, the agencies agree to a series of checkpoints in which the EPA and Army Corps will provide feedback in either concurrence or non-concurrence. These three checkpoints, as shown on the slide, are checkpoint A, which is purpose and need, checkpoint B, the range of alternatives, and checkpoint C, the identification of the least damaging, environmentally damaging practicable alternative, the LEDPA. Through the MOU, the agencies intend to have a single environmental document to cover both the FRA's obligations for NEPA and the Army Corps' obligations under the Clean Water Act. This supports timely and informed permit decisions, which mean a streamlined permitting process for the authority. Earlier this year, the EPA and Army Corps concurred fully on the purpose and need for the high-speed train system for both sections, Fresno Merced and Fresno Bakersfield, and so that completed checkpoint A. Within the last month, we're very pleased to have achieved concurrence from the EPA and Army Corps for the vast majority of the range of alternatives for both Merced Fresno and Fresno Bakersfield for the draft environmental documents. However, in their letters, the EPA and Army Corps have raised three issues that require additional effort, two in Merced Fresno and one in Fresno Bakersfield. I'll go through each of these three issues and how we recommend on proceeding. And I do want to note for the public that we did include the actual letters from the EPA and Army Corps in your book items, and those are on our website available to the public. First of all, for Merced Fresno, if you go to the next slide, both agencies, EPA and Army Corps, recommend that the authority carry forward a detailed study of the State Route 152 east-west alignment and Y connection. Both the EPA and Army Corps understand the time constraints that we're under in terms of moving forward with the Merced Fresno document. They know the schedule that Jeff just presented to you before myself. And with that understanding, they have proposed that the detailed analysis of SR 152 could be studied in detail in the San Jose to Merced environmental document, along with Avenue 21 and 24, and that the decision about the Y connection could be made as part of that process as opposed to the Merced Fresno document. Authority staff, we agree with the Army Corps and EPA that the 152 connection and corresponding Ys should require more detailed study and actually be looked at throughout the environmental process, but we do agree with them that we believe that the process that it makes most sense to include that in is the San Jose to Merced process, not the Merced Fresno process. An SR 152 alternative has been developed over the last month And that is the subject of our next agenda item 6, which you'll hear in just a minute. The Merced Fresno draft environmental document will provide you all the information that you need. You can go to the next one, it's okay. It'll provide you all the information that you need to make a north-south decision for the Merced to Fresno section. And as you recall from our last board meeting, as shown on the slide, there's really 3 primary routing alternative decisions here for north-south. You have the BNSF alternatives, you have the UP railroad alternatives, and then you have the hybrid alternatives. On this figure, what you can see there highlighted in the yellow box is the area around the Y, where the decision for that area would not be made as part of Merced Fresno, but instead would be made as part of the San Jose to Merced document. If we go to the next slide, to help clarify this, and actually this, you can see the 152 that we're talking about highlighted in that light blue there. And then go one more slide, and one more again. Okay, this highlights that if you were to select the BNSF alternative as your preferred alternative in the Merced Fresno document, you would end up with an alignment that looks something like this, where the north-south is one alignment connecting Merced and Fresno, but around the Y area that you remain with all 3 of the alternatives, the Avenue 24, SR 152, and the Avenue 21 alternatives would all be carried forward, and then that decision gets made later in the San Jose to Merced document. On the other hand, if you pick the UPRR alternative on the next slide, you'd have something like this, where again you have one north-south routing and several alternatives that carry forward for the next document. And finally, if you chose the hybrid, you'd end up with something like this for your preferred alternative. This may not be ideal, but this is the best way to continue moving the program forward, and we believe that this is the way to move forward for this, to make these decisions in an appropriate manner. If we go to the next slide, you can go one more. For the second issue, so I guess the main point is that all of the east-west alternatives would still be available for the Merced to San Jose document, and you would not be predetermining by making a north-south decision. With this slide, what we're showing here is the other issue that was raised by the Army Corps and EPA. In their letters, they both recommended that the Western Madera alignment alternative, which if you push again will show up in dash there, we labeled that as A3. They said that they believe that that should be studied in detail throughout the draft environmental document. They found that the agricultural impacts to them appeared to be similar to other alternatives, and they thought that there may be fewer community impacts and potentially fewer water impacts as well. We do not agree with them, in this case. We do not agree that this Western Madera that you see dashed there is a reasonable alternative that should be looked at in detail. This alternative was examined as part of the authority's alternative analysis, and as compared to the other alternatives that we just described, the UPRR, the BNSF, and the hybrid, it was deemed to have very high impacts to farmlands due to its departure from an existing transportation corridor and due to the orientation to the farmland at an angle where the high-speed trains would be located. They have considerably more severance impacts than the other alternatives that we are investigating. After discussions with the EPA and Army Corps, we're confident that we can provide additional documentation that is needed to demonstrate to them that this is not a reasonable alternative. You can click again. Therefore, what we propose to do is to provide additional documentation before the draft environmental document comes out to the EPA and Army Corps, and then, if needed, even after the document is released. Okay, the next slide, I'm going to go through the one alternative for Fresno to Bakersfield. But before I go through that one alternative, I did want to note, because I know it's come up in Kings County quite a bit, about some concerns about other alignment alternatives. I want to make the point that the EPA and Army Corps, while they have one area of disagreement, they've agreed on numerous decisions that the authority has made, including a couple of the key corridor decisions, by agreeing with the elimination of the I-5 corridor, south of downtown Fresno all the way to Bakersfield, and with the elimination of the UPRR corridor south of downtown Fresno all the way to Bakersfield, and all the various variations that we looked at for the UPRR corridor alternative. The one that they did have a disagreement on, if you go to the next slide, and go one more dot. Both agencies recommend what I'm showing here in the red dashed line, that the west of Hanford bypass alternative be studied in detail in the draft environmental document. This is another case where the authority staff, we do not agree that the west of Hanford alternative, which is shown here in red, which again was studied through alternative analysis processes, we do not believe that this is a reasonable alternative to study. The high-speed train alignment west of Hanford, shown here in red dashed, would forego the opportunity to provide a station that would serve the Hanford, Tulare, Visalia area, and would result in substantially greater environmental impacts than the blue line that you see there along the east. The environmental analysis showed that a high-speed train alignment west of Hanford would impact twice the area of seasonal wetlands, waters, and riparian habitat as the option to the east. It would also impact substantially more habitat of threatened endangered species and more prime farmland than the Hanford East alternative. Again, after discussions with the EPA and Army Corps, we're confident that we can provide additional information that is needed to better demonstrate to them why this west of Hanford alternative is not a reasonable alternative. We propose to provide additional documentation and do that, again, before and after the release of the draft if needed. Go to the next slide. This is my last slide. Our recommendations to you today enable us to meet the schedule that Jeff presented to you. These are in a resolution, HSRA 1119, for your approval. And these are to continue to work with the Army Corps and EPA to demonstrate why the Western Madera and west of Hanford do not merit more detailed study, to incorporate preliminary information of the SR 152 alternative and the whys into the Merced Fresno draft, to fully study the SR 152 and whys in the San Jose to Merced draft EIR-EIS, and then to adjust the decision-making structure so that the Merced Fresno document will be used for the north-south alignment determination for Merced Fresno, and the San Jose to Merced EIR-EIS will be used to make the east-west connection and the Y determinations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levitt. Questions, comments from the board? Ms. Schenk?
No, I'm good.
And I realize you're at a bit of a disadvantage. You can't see the slide, but
At what?
I realize you're at a bit of a disadvantage.
Yeah, no, I heard it all.
All right.
I heard it all.
Mr. Richards?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the west of Hanford alternative, I assume, based upon your comments a few moments ago, then you've done, or the staff and consultants have done a reasonably thorough investigation, and the results are that there's a greater perceived impact or real impact on the environment.
Yes.
I'm equally concerned. What about impact on existing farming and dairy operations?
Yes, we believe that there's more impact to prime ag land through the west of Hanford than there is on the east of Hanford as well. And in addition, one thing that we have heard from Kings, the area, is that while they're not supporting the alignment, that if an alignment were to go through Kings, that they would want a station, and there is no possible station location along there.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments, questions? All righty. Is there a motion? And I want to make sure that we're focused on the appropriate resolution. This resolution was distributed to all the board members. It's the very last page of agenda item number 5. At the top, the heading is Resolution HSRA 11. There's a blank, but it's now HRSA 19. Bearing that in mind, is there a motion?
May I ask another question before
Sure.
we go to the motion? What are the implications for timing and commitments and requirements that the authority has, Mr. Van Ark, with regards to consideration of extension of the public comment period?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Richard. You've seen the program schedule that Mr. Abercrombie presented today. That considers the 45 days. That means if we want to have a rod nod and a final determination by spring of 2012, that is the best we can do. So any extension would mean that that date would become a later date, and it would have direct impact on the project timeline.
On the construction start date that
Yes.
we're really tied to. Okay.
And the acquisition of real estate right away, et
I
cetera,
understand.
everything.
Thank you, Mr. Van Ark.
All righty. Is there a motion?
I'll move it.
Ms. Schenk moves.
Second.
Mr. Richards seconds. All right. Madam, or Mr. Secretary, would you call the roll?
Chairman Umberg,
Aye.
Mr. Richards,
Aye.
Ms. Schenk,
Aye.
Mr. Pringle, Mr. Burns, Mr. Toledo, Mr. Balganorth.
Aye.
All right. Very well. Resolution carries. Now, on to item number